criticized Kennedy so much on his foreign policy views during his campaign and presidential campaign, and I would understand that. I mean, Kennedy did campaign as a cold warrior and a mental gap filler, but did they have anything to say about his religious affiliations at all?
Not much, for among other reasons, because William F. Buckley was devout Catholic.
Okay.
So, and that's another example of sort of this old guard conservatism, maybe being anti-Catholic in some of its formulations, versus post-war conservative circles having some very prominent Catholic members who were attracted by the more traditionalist ideas that you needed to stand on the foundations of generations before and adhere to long-standing moral traditions and things of that nature. So no, there wasn't any criticism of Catholicism because many of these people were themselves Catholics.
In relation to that, it's interesting that the Ku Klux Klan in Grand Forks was very active in the 1920s, 30s, 40s. So there's a conservative group of people in a town like this, and Grand Forks wasn't much different than Minneapolis or even towns in Manitoba, where the Klan didn't have African Americans to discriminate against, but they did a real great job on Jews and Catholics. And there were rallies at the fairgrounds with crosses burning and the hoods and the whole shooting matches if you were in Alabama. And when Kennedy was assassinated, you know, they talk about classrooms in Dallas where elementary students stood up and cheered. The same thing happened in Grand Forks, not to the same extent, but I was sitting in a classroom at Grand Forks Central when the news 2 months after he was here came over the speaker, and a person to my right turned to another person and said, "Good." So the anti-Catholicism syndrome that was here, because it was largely Protestant, was real, and probably, you know, when you multiply that how many times across the country, is part of, I hate to say it, some part of the less desirable conservative movement.
Yeah, certainly. Yeah, it was certainly there, and I just wanted to minimize presence. It wasn't a factor for national review, but it certainly was there. It would be something that certainly somebody like Buckley would oppose, speak out against, but it was certainly present. And as mentioned in Planet Dinner, I think this, my home state is another hotbed from the 1920s. Oregon was a notorious for Ku Klux Klan activity. And again, it was all anti-Catholic. Of note in Oregon, that might have been such a homogenous community otherwise.
That's another quite an interesting history between the Kennedy family and its National Review and by extension Buckley, because as I understand it, Buckley refused to come into Massachusetts to campaign for Kennedy's opponent in the Senate race too, because of support and camaraderie that existed between Buckley and Kennedy's father. Joe Kennedy, in fact, was dating one of his sisters. There's a family connection and Catholicism. And the idea I told him to, I'm sure he said basically, if I had done, then the election was close, possibly Kennedy might have won the Senate seat and used it to springboard for presidency too.
Yeah, there certainly is a complicated history there because, again, these are two prominent Catholic families in the Northeast, and there was history of interfamily dating and of interactions between Joseph Kennedy, of course, was much more isolationist in his political outlook, especially pre-World War II, which meshed quite nicely with William Buckley's father and his own outlook on things. And Kennedy being an ambassador in England, the Buckleys having a lot of connections in England, there were a lot of connections there. And of course, in 1952 as well, Kennedy's opponent would have been Henry Cabot Lodge, who wouldn't have lit a fire under conservatives for the most part. He was yeah, a more active